15th year. Thank Scott for a really great job that he's doing his first year. This has really been great. I've been trying to come for several years. This is the first time that I've been actually able to coordinate my schedule with the show schedule. So it's a real thrill for me. I'm Richard Spittelny. I'm one of the co-founders for Star Software, and I've been its president since its inception in 1982. So we're not sure about this, but I think we may be one of the, if not the longest running companies still owned by the original founders. And this morning we're here to kind of reminisce about those early days, answer some questions, and also we're going to preview the 30th anniversary edition of Boulder Dash for iPhone. I'm going to try to quickly cover 32 years, so I'm going to use my notes and kind of whiz through these, but let me introduce Chris Gray.
Everybody.
He is one of the co-creators of the original Boulder Dash, which, as you probably guessed by now, is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. After Boulder Dash, Chris established Gray Matter, a leading independent game studio that he ran through the 1990s. More recently, he served 10 years as VP and executive producer at EA and senior VP of production for Majesco. He has led teams as large as 150 people on virtually every significant game platform over the past 3 decades. Notable titles launched include the Harry Potter franchise, NASCAR, Superman Returns, Blueless Pet Shop, Zumba Fitness, G.I. Joe, Monopoly, Scrabble, Adventures Bob, Infiltrator, and the soon-to-be-released Boulder Dash 30th anniversary, which we will chat about, as I mentioned earlier this morning. And it's one of the first titles developed by Chris's new company, Tapstar Interactive. I'm just curious, how many of you are from Vegas? Okay, so, but the majority of you have actually flown in or come here somehow just for the show. I mean, that's great. And we thank you for coming. That's, it's great to see you with that kind of enthusiasm. So I'll start with a bit of the history. I was a film producer before starting for Star Software, and Billy Blake was my film partner at the time, and he invested in a computer retail store. And Fernando Herrera was actually managing that store, but he was a programmer. His day job was managing the store. And back then, you could call Atari and actually speak to the engineers back then. His serial number on his Atari 400 was something like 12. I mean, it was, and they were announcing that, you had 128 colors, and he called them up and said, well, we should let you know how to make 256, and things like that. And his very first game was called Space Chase, and we believe it's the first game to have wraparound, where you were able to move your ship off the screen to the right, reappear on the left. So anyhow, Fernando's son was born with multiple cataracts, and before he was the age of 2, he had had a series of operations, and Stevie was his name, and to test his vision, Fernando used his computer to kind of simulate the eye chart. So if you go to eye chart, the letter E, on top it was a big letter E, and it got progressively smaller and smaller, and you would just say to the doctor with your fingers which way it was oriented. So he would do this, simulating close and far on the computer, and found out that Steve was seeing well. So he said, oh, this is kind of boring for Stevie. Well, I'll do a program and I'll do upper and lowercase letters, A for apple, and B for boy, and whatever. And he had a program that he called My First Alphabet. And that was submitted to Atari. They were having an amateur competition. They were looking for best educational program, best game, best productivity, what have you. He won the best educational program. Then they put the best of each category in the overall competition, and he won their Star Award Merit. And it was the first Star Award ever given out, which is where First Star Software, it gets its name. He won $25,000, and Atari, to promote computers, started running 2-page ads in like Life magazine or what have you, how a father's love had, with the use of the computer had really, and it really had made a big difference in their lives. And so about that time, my film partner, Billy, and I said, well, making feature films, especially from the East Coast, is a very difficult thing to do. I mean, we pulled it off a couple of times, but we said, why don't we just try to do something with Fernando? We'll build a company around him, and we'll each fund it, and Fernando will work out of his house. Whatever he wants to do, that's what we'll do. Astro Chase was what we came up with. We started the company in July of 1982, and we shipped Astro Chase on the Atari December 7th the same year. Anybody here familiar with Astro Chase? Yes? Okay, good. One of the things that you'll recall about Astro Chase, besides the fabulous graphics and those opening animations of the reward out with the flying saucer and the astronaut walking out, was single thrust propulsion, which was a very unique control at the time. You could fly in one direction and simultaneously shoot in any one of 8 other directions. So you could be chased by the enemy, fleeing from the enemy, but shoot behind you or shoot a guy above you. Meanwhile, you're continuing, you're locked on in your course. The first people to see the game were Bill Kunkel and Arnie Katz, and they were the editors of Electronic Games magazine at the time, and they were, over the years, fabulously generous to First Star Software. And actually, one of our first flyers,
I remember that.
This is what Bill Kunkel had written. And the first game to be released under the First Star banner will be an arcade-quality space shootout dubbed Astro Chase. The game revolves around the defense of planet Earth from invading aliens and features not only spectacular graphics, scrolling and audio, or should that be soundtrack, but a technical innovation, single-thrust propulsion, that could cause a minor revolution in programming video and computer games. This proprietary process allows the human pilot to lock his craft on course and then fire independently in any, I won't bore you with the whole thing, but it was accolades like that that really helped us and gave us the confidence that we were onto something and on the right track. Astro Chase won many awards, Best Graphics of the Year and Best Shoot 'em Up of the Year. And it won an Archie Award. Are any of you aware of the Archies, the Electronic Games? They were the Academy Awards of video games back in the day. And in the museum, you'll find this little Rockford doll, the star of Boulder Dash, little red and white striped plush doll. It's one of 2 prototypes. There were only 6 made. We had 2. We gave one to the museum. But that was something we were very proud of. We won that in 1984, actually. Another hopefully interesting story is we then took the game to Steven Greenberg. You probably won't know his name, but he was the largest individual owner of stock in Commodore. He was a very wealthy man. He had the top floors of 30 Rockefeller Plaza, had a company called Animetrics. We showed him Astro Chase, and he said, I love it, would like it for the Commodore 64. And we said, that's great, what do you have in mind? He said, well, I'll give you $25,000. Billy was, we had just started the company and we were doing this out of our own pocket, and here's $25,000. We had just shipped our first title, and we both thought it sounded great, but we said we'd like to run this by Fernando. He's a minority partner, but he's a big part of you know, what this is all about. And he said to us, no, you don't understand. If you leave, I won't even take your calls tomorrow. I mean, it's $25,000 or, and we said, you know, that's, you know, I'm sure it sounds good, but we really, you know, we have to run this by Fernando. And we started to leave, we're out the yellow. He said $250,000, but that's, so anyhow, we did not end up making that deal. Not because we weren't happy to accept $250,000, but because they wanted to lock up our next 4 titles, and it was kind of, they wanted to make it a 5-picture deal, as we refer to it in the movies, and whatever. But, so at the very last minute, after that meeting, which we felt very good about what we had, people who were in the same offices as us were an electronics hardware company, some kind of like adapters or, you know, nothing related to what we were doing. They said, well, we're going to CES. I said, oh, well, what's CES? I mean, you understand, I was a film producer, we didn't know much about what was going on. He said, you should definitely go. I've got a 10-foot table. It's outside the main hall, but it's, you know, it's there. You can have half the table. So once I decided to do that, I rented a rear screen, front screen projection. So we were set up outside of the main hall by the escalators going up to the restrooms. But I had printed out screenshots of Astro Chase. And so I had no meetings with anybody. I didn't know anybody, but so I went around and to all of the big exhibitors, and Parker Brothers was there. And I didn't, as I say, I had no meetings with anybody or anything like that. But while he was talking, I, you know, when I'm waiting in line, I just like, you know, showing these pictures. What is that? I said, well, it's a new game of ours. You know, he said, could you wait a second? He finished his meeting and he said, where are you? And I said, over here. We set a time. They came. They loved it. And so that was January of 1983 in Vegas, in fact, at CES. And by April, we had made a deal with Parker Brothers for $250,000, a number that I felt confident in throwing out, and we got. And so that we were kind of off and running then, really, as a company, because it wasn't just Billy and I financing it out of our pockets. We had.
You had so many Astro Chase advertisements. I used to have all these magazines that were everywhere. I don't know how you pulled that off. Like, wow.
Well, what happened is we kind of fell into game publishing because of Fernando working at the store that Billy had invested in. And so we, as I said, we made the decision, it's a lot easier to produce a game and develop a game and handle our own distribution. The feature film, you know, even if it's in a can, unless the studio has financed it, it may never be seen by anybody. So what we did is we just bought every computer magazine that was out there. We said, oh, they took a full-page ad, we'll do that. Oh, they have an 800 number, we need an 800 number. They take credit cards, oh my God, how do you do that? You know, so we got a vendor account and a merchant account, and like you said, we just kind of went crazy because we felt we had a.
Did that work for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we sold about 40,000 units of Astro Chase between December 7th of '82, and we did the deal with Parker Brothers in April of '83. And the way we cut that deal is we were still able to distribute the Atari and the Commodore versions, and they got, I think, the 5200, the 2600 rights, and the cartridge rights to those home computer platforms, where we continued to publish them on floppies, on discs. So, yeah, no, it did work for us. Much to Fernando's credit, the game was really, you know, groundbreaking and beautiful, and Electronic Games, Bill and Arnie and Joyce, and all of the other reviewers, just loved it. So we were lucky that our first one was a hit, and was very well received. 1983, that was a very busy year for us. We licensed a game called Panic Button for the TRS-80 color to Tandy. That was actually an idea that I had from was the I Love Lucy skit where they're doing the chocolates on the conveyor belt. So Panic Button, which is a conveyor belt game, that's where that came from. It was programmed by I think he was still in high school. He was just in from Russia. He had heard about the company, and we said, well, here's this idea. And he did a great job. And then Jim Mangano submitted a game, which Flip and Flop, or folks here familiar with Flip and Flop. That was a game that he submitted to us. We liked it. We were the ones who asked him, well, instead of hopping around on the tiles as the kangaroo, could we flip it and then be hanging every other level? And at the time, Jim was in the Navy. He worked in a top secret bunker. They tracked every nuclear submarine in the world. He was on that team. And here we are exchanging discs stamped with confidential. And I had no idea until he said, you don't understand. Every time I try to leave, I'm stopped and I'm searching. Can we take off? This is very important to us, but so obviously we stopped stamping them confidential. 1983 is when Peter Liepa, the other co-creator of Boulder Dash, submitted the game to us before it was finished. I happened to be the one to open the package, played it, ignored the blocky, graphics, and compared to Astro Chase, it was definitely a different look, but the gameplay was just so innovative and so addictive, and so we will talk more about that when Chris takes over. I will say that it was October 28th, 1983 is when we acquired the IP. In 1983, we were working with Alex Levins and Shirley Russell. We did a game called Boing. That was for the 2600. I don't know that I've ever talked before about the fact that, I'm jumping ahead, but we're just about to where we sold half the company to Warner. And so that they were interested, Atari was interested in the game. They wanted to change it to Jump because of the Van Halen song, and they would take the license. So, that never happened, but we came close. And in 1983, Fernando was working on his second game, and that was Bristles, which I'm hoping some of you have heard of. It was innovative. We called it Sex Select. You could pick from 1 or 4 characters you could play as a boy or a girl. And you were a painter, you were riding elevators and buildings and trying to, do all these things, painting primarily. Supported 1 to 4 players, had slow motion, invisible paint, all sorts of cool stuff. Now he is here. So Adam Bellin, who was just speaking here at the Activision, did the C64 port of Bristles. Adam, you have any stories for us on
that's the game I did right between Atari and Activision.
Uh-huh.
I was 19 still, working in Manhattan, and I think Vince had brought me to you
Right,
guys.
that's Vince Desi.
Vince Desi right
next
here.
to Adam, and Vince Desi is the gentleman who introduced us to Mike Rydell, who did 2 of the 3 Spy vs. Spy.
Right, so Mike and I met at RIT. We were suite mates, and we basically, Mike turned me on to the Apple II. We were both working in a computer center there, and we left RIT together to make games. Vince was the first agent in the industry who basically staffed up the Atari office in New York, the secret Atari office on 23rd Street, not 42nd Street, and also Mountain View Activision, and brokered deals and for you guys as well,
Right.
brought you talent, and that's how we came to be. But no, I thought Bristles was amazing. It was, I did the C64 port. Fernando had already designed it and had it on the 800, but it had Tchaikovsky music going in the background. It had I think it was one of the most fun games, really, at the time, because it really had a certain kind of play mechanic, but the painting, it was easy to pick up, but it really felt almost more like an arcade game, more than other C64 titles at that time. Had maybe a Donkey Kong feel, and the fact that you're climbing around and moving around, different kind of game, but you're painting and you're avoiding things. It was clever. And back then, as some of you guys may or may not know, the Commodore 64 wasn't powerful enough to develop for itself if you were going to do any real games. So most people used like an Apple, and then we would hook up a joystick cable between the game ports of the two machines, and we had a host and target. So the Commodore was the target, the Apple was the host. Commodore didn't even have proper assemblers, and tools. So you do all your debugging on the Apple, but you're working on code that you would then execute on your target C64. And the funny thing is, back then we all came up with the same solutions. Everybody who was making games back then on the C64 all figured out some kind of game cable arrangement to be able to do the exact same thing. Yeah, I remember coming up to
Right, you
show you
come to the
guys
office.
milestones, to come up to the office, yeah. And back then, that's how it was done. Everybody was out of house. Very few companies had any in-house developers at all. It was good times, yeah.
No, it really was. It's
Yeah.
great. We were talking last night, and I think you touched on it in the Activision panel. Back then, when Fernando did Astro Chase, he wrote the code, he did the music, he did the graphics. And as Chris can attest, having teams a couple of decades later of 150.
Yeah.
Over,
It's a very different feeling.
Right, and now we're kind of back because of the power of all of the tools, Unity or, what have you. You've got individuals again making, Flappy Birds, whatever, making hit games. So it's very interesting for those of us who've been in it 30 plus years to see that, evolution. And it was, thanks. Anything else? I don't remember.
I guess that's it. I got some little
To put you on the spot.
anecdotes. Yeah. Well, you talk about how one person could do everything. One of the things I did, I had to do like everyone else is, if you wanted to make art, you had to make your own utilities to even make the art. And I made a program to let me just use the keyboard, just to use keystrokes to move the cursor around and sort of literally edit pixel by pixel and maybe create a tiny graphic that I could then save and somehow, put into the game I was working on. And that's what I used to basically take a game like Bristles. So I'd use my own tools and sort of redraw that stuff. And that tool was so useful to me, someone else saw it, they said, hey, wait,
Right.
I could sell that.
There's a lot of
Just
that.
add a joystick thing, so it became something called Sorcerer's Apprentice, which before the Koala Pet came out was like the best-selling graphics tool, because it was like the only graphics tool on the C64, but that I also used to work on Bristles as well.
Did the C64 ever get a mature development environment?
Well, not really. To tell you the truth, I don't think there was, unless you're doing some simple basic kind of stuff or a very, very small game, I think you always had to have another computer as a host for all C64. And then eventually, like at Activision, we had a small hardware team where we would build our own C64 dev systems, which would be like a C64 board, plus some other wires and controls to be able to set breakpoints or easily add an in-circuit emulator or a logic analyzer if you needed to. And then that would be controlled. Like at Activision, we all shared a PDP 1144 DEC computer. 7 of us had CIT Amber terminals hooked up with a serial port to these custom Commodore 64 dev systems. And that was our development environment. So instead of an Apple, we were all sharing like a mini computer, but same kind of thing. And then at EA, it was also the same thing. There was something we had called DDT, something like that. Same thing, custom target development systems, then slowly we were starting to use PCs instead of Apples and DECs and stuff. Those are the early days of EA as well. But yeah, we were all, one person could do just about everything. Actually, at Activision, the first artist ever hired as a full-time artist was Hillary Mills. And before that, there wasn't even a position called artist. A programmer would just do all the the images, bit by bit, pixel by pixel. So Hillary did graphics for Murder on the Mississippi, which was my first original there, and then every other game after that. We always had a dedicated artist and then a musician as well, and the birth of the small team.
Right. Thanks, Alan. I'm going to kind of rush through so that we can get on to history of Boulder Dash and show you the new one here. But 1983, towards the end, sold half the company to Warner Software, division of Warner Communications. And they had the Atari Labs in New York at the time. And once I was kind of related through the acquisition, I remember going to the Atari Labs. It was amazing. There were little robots running around. They had these laser pens. You could write in the air. Whatever it hung there in the air. They pictured this at like nightclubs, and stuff like that. I don't know how they did it, but I saw it. It was very cool. There was a cassette player that whatever tape you were playing, the words scrolled from right to left on a little LED, like you see in Times Square or something, those big. This is amazing stuff. I don't think any of it, well, some of the robots, the laser pen thing, but that was great. At that time also, Mad Magazine, DC Comics, they became sister companies, so we took the rights to Spy vs. Spy, Superman, and Wonder Woman. We never exploited Wonder Woman. Unfortunately, we just ran out of things to do. But we had 3 games in the Spy vs. Spy series. They did very well, won all sorts of awards, and kind of bring us to 2012, related to Spy vs. Spy. We released an iOS version of Spy vs. Spy. There's a modern mode, but a retro mode to that. We've just released Spy 1 on Android with Chilingo a little over a month ago, and we're just wrapping up the Windows 8.1 version for Microsoft, and they're going to feature it on their store end of next month. In between, I'm going to really hyperspeed ahead here, but we have supported a lot of the old platforms, 5200, 2600. We've had a lot of our games come out, and we are just showing here at the show the television port of Boulder Dash, which William Moeller's company we're co-publishing with, so you can check that out in the exhibit. I think, Chris, maybe we'll leapfrog over, do a transition. I think you were about 14 at the time when you had the idea and then first met Julieta.
Sure, I'll give you a quick backstory. So I was, in those days, as most everybody would have been, self-taught, actually self-taught programmer and game designer. I've been prototyping games on an Atari 400 and ultimately an 800. And this is when I was still in high school, obviously. So I had been sort of working my way through different kinds of game mechanics, and I remember seeing there was a neat coin-op called the Pit, in case anybody's interesting, that had some. The game was kind of interesting, and it had some neat mechanics involving digging and rocks, and I thought that looked like a really fun thing where you could sort of explore the world. And the thing about that game was that the rocks didn't really go anywhere, so I started prototyping a game, actually in BASIC, where the rocks would fall and roll and stack. Sometime, I guess it would have been the summer of 80, yeah, it would have been 82, yeah, summer of 82.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Peter Board does in 83.
So there was actually a Canadian company I'm originally Canadian and still am, and lived outside Toronto. There was a local company, I meant to say, that was making games for the Atari 400 and 800 cartridges. Predominantly, they were called in-home software, and I had hooked up with them coincidentally through a store in Toronto who had connections with the company making the games. And I used to go to the store. I think it was Electronic Playroll it was called, and I would just be, you'd be going crazy with all the new games coming out, and there were just, awesome things every week. So I'd go into the city and I'd play the games, and when I eventually came up with what became Boulder Dash prototype, I actually took it in My father drove me in on his way to work, and I went in with the cassette and said, "Hey, I have this game I'd like you to look at." And they got really excited about it. And I wasn't at that point. I was starting to learn assembly language, but I wasn't all the way there. So we sort of made the connection with In-Home, and then they had been working with a series of other developers. Most of them were busy writing their own games. I think Peter had approached them, wondering if there was sort of a project he could get involved with. I don't think Peter had ever written a game before.
No.
So I actually had a lot more game experience than Peter had up to that point. But anyway, so they made the connection, and then Peter and I started working on what was Boulder Dash. And the original game was actually like a 40 by 24 non-scrolling, single screen Atari game. So if you actually had seen the prototype of the game, as Peter was turning it from sort of basic into assembly language through Forth, I should add, which was an unusual programming language back in the day. It was all on a single screen. There wasn't scrolling. The characters were quite tiny, but the kind of the emergent behaviors and all the cool stuff that I sort of think of when I think of Boulder Dash started really coming through, and digging around and seeing lots and lots of rocks falling became quite exciting. And then it was Peter who came up with the idea of turning it into a scrolling game and enlarge the graphics. So it's always had that kind of blocky quality to it because it really was built on a grid, and that's how the sort of the physics function in that environment. So and anyway, I'm trying to think where I could take that sort of part of the conversation. I went on to write games on other games on my own. And at some point, I stopped being kind of a generalist because I did, the audio and the graphics, and I wrote my own software to do the pixel pushing and use an Atari joystick to create graphics. And then eventually, you bring on an artist who was obviously more capable than I was, and other engineers. So that started my company, Gray Matter, and then, as Richard mentioned, I ran that for a number of years into the 90s. I think at its peak we had about 75 people, but then it becomes very much a business, and you're just focused on trying to keep everything moving forward. So it was an exciting time because everything was new in those days, and there wasn't a lot of reference certainly on how to program games, and everything you learned you had to sort of learn on your own or get it out of a magazine. You couldn't learn it obviously at school, so it's.
First of all, one question is, In-Home Software did a baseball that looked really great, but it was basic and it was compiled. Was there any idea that they would compile your basic to run it faster? There were other technologies around, but at that point it seemed like that was the best path forward for Boulder Dash. And who came up with Rockford?
That would I give credit to Peter for that one.
Yeah.
So,
Who named them?
I did.
Oh, cool.
And then in sequels, the female version is Crystal. I named her too. So you might think of that. But you mentioned how, and anybody who knows Boulder Dash, the original game, is very blocky and very tile-based feeling. And it's necessary from a programming standpoint and a gameplay standpoint that things work that way, but they don't necessarily anymore have to look that way.
Exactly.
And that's so we can maybe.
Yeah, I could talk. So as we were looking at a 30th anniversary edition of Boulder Dash, I had a team. Now this is taking place in San Francisco, and we really wanted to investigate, what we could do to kind of make the game feel a bit fresher and get away from, at least visually, that really kind of blocky, 8-bit style look, which I think is near and dear to many people's hearts. But it's also, time moves on, and here we are, and we have all these great technologies, and we thought, well, what could we do, in sort of a pseudo 3D style, where we maintain the classic gameplay and the feel and the predictability of how things move around in the world, but it looked and to some extent feels different just because it's presented in a very different way. And then we also, decided we could do something with diagonal movement, so we've added ramps, and just try to create a more kind of, I just describe it as a more organic, natural.
And there was a lot of discussion because there have been numerous sequels to Boulder Dash, and I've produced all of them, overseen them. There are many teams from all over the world, but I'm the constant. And we know that there is a core purist audience who really loves Boulder Dash, and if you do a different look, that's not Rockford. But here we are 30 years later with the original team, Peter Liepa and Chris Gray, and we mutually made the decision, what we really want to do here is like, well, what if they were doing what they were doing then, now?
Yeah.
Knowing that they already have a gameplay that has proven itself, loved by many millions, but here we are, and we're dealing with touch interfaces and things like that, so I think
It's pretty fair. Yeah, I mean, and that's a huge challenge. So you don't want to, again, you know, change the gameplay in such a way that you wouldn't feel like Boulder Dash. And yeah, we talked about a lot of options about, you know, having very sort of organic, sort of, you know, non-linear shapes and having the world be much more sort of physics driven, with more advanced physics than we would have been able to do back in the day. But the reality is, once things start getting too complex, you can't really predict what's going to happen. And I think one of the most enjoyable things about Boulder Dash is that you can play it and you can kind of learn from your mistakes or try the level, you know, 50 different ways and come up with different solutions. And I think that's kind of the part
the
of the
thing
game.
that I love about Boulder Dash is you usually end up blaming yourself.
That's key. In fact, that's absolutely essential for a lot of fun games.
I can't believe I did that. I mean, you know, the Firefly was right there. I mean, I shouldn't have gone that way. I should have gone this way. It's not one of these things where, you know, and Tetris is a phenomenal game, but, you know, it reaches a speed after which it you know, you're blaming the speed, not, you should say, well, that's not humanly possible to have handled that.
Yeah, and on that note, like when you take something that originally you played on an 8-bit Atari one-button joystick and you put it on a touch screen, it's got a very different feel. So it took a long time to get the controls right. We're pretty happy with it actually. And you know, touch screens don't really do D-pads very well, so we've tried to come up with a control scheme that is not a D-pad at all, but it gives you that feel, and it's very kind of loose, and you can touch the screen anywhere you want.
I think we ought to,
Yeah.
I don't know when the next,
What platform have you out for?
So we're going to launch in October on iOS and Android shortly after that, and then in 2015 we are planning to launch a PC and Mac version, and hopefully some other platforms. So
Chris will
Yeah, I can-
demo the game a little, and but before you leave, if you want, we do have special pins that we did just for the show, so we'll leave those
we have
out.
Boulder Dash pins, so you can, and we have lots to give out. So
All right, so let's quickly
yeah,
get
so I'm
into it.
gonna just run through a few levels.
Hope that everything works.
Hopefully it will.
Why setting that up?
Yeah.
There's a quick version, right?
Yes.
And you didn't mention that, is there a reason? Or?
You know, just due to time.
Okay.
We like, no, we had a $1.3 million deal with a company called Michael's Fund.
Okay, yeah.
And that sure felt great at the time. But they never paid us except for the down payment on signing. So,
What does Intelligence have to bring that also?
so Terry Graham, yes, so I made a deal with them. So they, all of the rights reverted. So Microfund was doing like Apple II, and the ColecoVision, and I think they were going to do the C64. We were still publishing the Atari. I mean, I can't tell you, we don't have enough time, how many platforms we were out at the time. You know, there are 4 versions, twin-up versions of Boulder Dash, for example. But, yeah, but can you see? I don't know how well
It's bright enough. Hopefully
it's playing.
you're welcome to come up to the front so I'll show you and give you one go. You know, one thing you'll notice here, this is actually the inspired by the original music. It's been recomposed by a really talented sound designer, but it's actually the original music. So
It's going to be a totally free-to-play game, which
Yeah.
is a whole discussion unto itself. But
yeah, free play, lots of different. It's going to launch with 220 levels and 11 worlds. We have 9 different characters. We'll recognize a few users. I have to do one thing here quickly. My window's done something funny here. Oh, because it's on the projector. There.
this is obviously a debug version.
Yes, it's a debug. And this is written, or it's using the Unity engine, which is really a fantastic way to bring it across, consistently to a bunch of different platforms. So I'll show you can see the characters if you're familiar. There's Rockford, there's Crystal. We have some new characters we've created here. So the classic Rockford, as you might recognize him as a kind of a boxy new version of the doll that Richard mentioned in the museum. And then we've got some other people ones. We've got the jetpack, and then that's sort of our reinterpretation of classic 8-bit Rockford. And you'll notice the style. I just wanted to mention that very quickly. We've gone with a kind of a very kind of a retro meets kind of funky new style. So we've gone with things that they're kind of boxy looking, but they're as you're about to see, they live in a very different looking world now. So let's go to.
Yeah, before we lose the room, why don't we?
Cool. And we do things like gem combos, classic Firefly. That's me getting bonked on the head. So I'll play through levels and I'll jump around. I'll just show, you can see how the world looks. We're really digging through dirt and it has depth to it, but it's still, recognizably Boulder Dash. I'll show you some of the characters here.
We have we have the amoeba, we have the firefly, we have the butterfly, but we also have a lot of new exciting dragons, snake characters.
This introduces the dragon character, so it's kind of fun. They'll munch your gems if you don't get rid of them. And the trick is to hit him on the head. Back. Boom.
Nice.
Unfortunately, on the projector and this lighting, you really can't see how beautiful the graphics are. There's a lot of parallax. There's a great sense of depth to it. We have a freeze power-up, which lets you freeze all of the objects on the screen, and then you can maneuver the screen, the elements on the screen, so you can move enemies which are frozen. You can move boulders or what have you. It only lasts so long, and then however you've configured the screen, then you have to deal with it.
We'll show Dynamite.
So when it comes out for like Mac, will that be the Mac store Steam, or are you just going to publish it as standalone?
Ideally, yeah, Steam in the Mac store. So.
Right.
Above, okay.
Yeah, it'll be out on iOS. There's Dynamite.
Oh wait, so this will be available on Steam as well?
Yes.
Oh, sweet.
The PC version, which we are strongly contemplating maybe doing something on Kickstarter. And because there are a lot of things that we could do in terms of an editor. And it would be the first editor since the Boulder Dash construction kit in 1987.
Okay.
And we would really like to take advantage of things like the internet and file share and all of that.
Have you thought about anything like an Xbox One or anything like that?
Yeah.
For your thoughts on that?
This is how level, and one thing we're planning to do with the PC version is to have an editor, so you'll be able to create your own levels and share them with your friends. I'll just give you kind of a quick example of, well, first of all, load a different level.
Chris, we got to lose the room for the next.
Oh, okay,
For the
so
next battle.
I guess that's a wrap.
Yeah, I'm sorry that we.
Is there,
I can hang around if you have any questions, and please don't forget we did these special buttons here at the show, so.